Today I'm going to show you 3 different ways to make iced coffee. We're going to do one regular hot poured over ice. We're going to do one Japanese style iced coffee, and we're going to make one cold brew. Alright, first things first, obviously we have my trusty grinder, have my scale, have my cup to weigh the beans, and I'm using an AeroPress for this method. So we got an AeroPress over here, filter, screen, plungers, and stir. I'm going to weigh 15 for 200 grams, 15 grams of coffee for 200 grams of water. So we got our beans ground, got some ice in a little decanter pitcher thing. We're gonna zero out our scales. Okay, now we're gonna measure our beans one last time. Alrighty, got my hot water, and we are gonna reset my scales again, zero my scales, and we are going to 200 grams of water. It's okay if you go a little bit over. The key reason why we use scales is to keep a consistent brew. We're gonna keep the plunger in order to hold the water from falling in all the way. As you see, it's already starting to fall down. We're gonna do that for a minute or so, let that brew. After a minute has passed, we're going to take this off and stir, break that crust. A couple stirs. Again, you don't want to do too many stirs. And the reason being is that as you stir, you're extracting more and more of the coffee. So you don't want to over extract it. You're going to start to push. Now your push should take about 30 seconds or so. If you grind it too fine, you're going to push really slowly. It's going to be hard to push down. If you grind it too coarsely, it's going to be very easy to push through on the AeroPress. And we got our iced coffee. Now this is an AeroPress over iced coffee. Again, it can be used with any sort of hot coffee over ice. You're gonna have delicious coffee, extracted the way you would normally extract coffee with hot water, and enjoy. Cheers. Alrighty, and now we're gonna make the Japanese style iced coffee. Now the Japanese style iced coffee is you're weighing your ice, you're going to be weighing your coffee coming in, and you're going to use the ratios appropriately. So you're going to use 40% ice and 60% coffee. You're going to make your coffee slightly stronger than you would if you're making a regular V60. So I'm going to use 70 for a 1 liter brew, so that's going to be 35 for a 500 milliliter brew. When you make a normal iced coffee, like we did in the first video, your brewing is going to be slightly watered down. That's because you made a hot coffee and you poured it over ice. The goal of a Japanese style iced coffee is that you're already incorporating the weight of the ice and the water that the ice is going to be adding to your drink. That I've already washed out the filter. Again, we're going to zero our scales. Now we're going to use 40% ice and 60% brew. So I'm making a 500 milliliter brew. That means I'm going to be using 200 milliliters of ice. Get our coffee out. Quick sniff. Whew. Zero out your scales. This is a fermented coffee, and we're going to do a taste test at the end, so stay tuned for the rest of this video. I'm going to get my hot water, and I'll be right back. And we're back. Let's get this brew going. We're going to let this brew for 45 seconds and use a stir to stir it up a little bit. To let this bloom. Again, you don't want to stir too much, but you do want to get all of the grounds wet. If you'll notice, most of the ice is melted already. That's normal. It's kind of supposed to melt. And again, the brew has come to exactly 500, the line over here in the decanter. Poured over some more ice, so you get that really nice chilled feeling, and enjoy. And for our third type of coffee in this summer heat and this beautiful summertime is cold brew. This method is going to take somewhere between 8 to 12 hours. You could do it for longer, but I personally like the flavor of an 8 to 12 hour cold brew. The flavors are very different from what you get from a hot brewed coffee. Much less acidity or almost no acidity in your coffee. Definitely worth a try if you've never made cold brew before. You don't need any fancy equipment. I'm just going to be using a regular pitcher over here. Okay? We're going to be using a 1:8 ratio. Now I know most recipes will tell you to use a 1:4 ratio, which is 1 part coffee to 4 parts water. I personally like the 1:8 ratio. All right, now you're gonna be grinding them a lot coarser than you normally would. So I'm turning it all the way from the AeroPress to the filter to the French press to the steep. We're gonna grind that and go. Zero it out. Take out your coffee. And if you'll notice, it is ground a lot coarser. So pour that in. Got some filtered water here. And go. Now one last pro tip over here. As the crust is beginning to form, and already it started forming over here, if you'll notice, it's a little bit hard to see, but there's a crust coming around. Let this brew on your counter, but don't put this in the fridge. And then when you want to serve it cold, pour it over ice, which is what I'm going to be doing. Now let's break that crust. You can use a spoon or you can just swirl. Right here, crust is broken. Now it's going to settle automatically. It's going to settle by itself. Pour that cold brew over some nice ice. If you want, feel free to filter it through one of your V60 filters or something, and enjoy. Hi. Now for a quick taste test after using those three methods. This is the hot over ice. I use the AeroPress. This is the Japanese style. I use the V60. And this is the cold brew style. Now we tried to account for this by making our brew a little bit stronger than we normally would with an AeroPress, but it's still diluted. The flavor's a little bit harder to taste. The coffee's a little bit less strong. It's delicious. Not as strong as I would like particularly. Now let's try the Japanese style, V60. So this is really my flavor over here. I'm feeling a lot of the fermentedness of the coffee coming through. A little bit of maybe caramelly, a little bit juicy. No real particular flavor, not so jumping out at me. But what is jumping out at me is one of the fermented style of the coffee. The strength, it's really the strength that I like because I accounted for the coffee and the ice already in the beginning. This is super delicious. And the cold brew over here. Now notice this is a little bit of a lighter cold brew. Normally cold brews you're gonna be getting darker. The reason being is I used a 1:8 ratio. And then we added ice afterwards. That diluted it down a little bit. 1:8 will not give you as strong of a coffee as obviously if you use a 1:4 ratio. The same way also I only brew it for 8 hours versus brewing for 12 or 24. This is the style that I like. There's a lot of room to play around with cold brew. It's not as exact as a hot brew method. So play around, find what you like. Try brewing for 8 hours, try brewing a 1:4 ratio, a 1:6 ratio, a 1:10, a 1:2. Feel free, do you want to dilute it with water? Do you not want to, do you want to drink it straight? Enjoy. Like I was expecting, there's zero acidity in here, as the heat of the hot water, which normally brings out the acidity, is not there. The fruity flavors are a little bit less noticeable. Getting the fermentiness, getting a little bit of the fruity in there. Also the typical caramelly notes that come through when you're making the cold brew. Overall, delicious. Alrighty, so this is our 3 ways of making coffee at home. I would love to hear your thoughts on how do you make coffee at home? Do you add milk and sugar? Do you like your coffee straight? Do you normally use instant coffee and maybe you want to try one of these? Let me know in the comments down below.